And I can see where people get mixed up when they look at these graphs. I guess people are just very used to the x-axis being associated with time.
This is an example, right? This is the one that comes up a lot. This is Clark County, Nevada. And the bottom one is the one that we showed a lot in the beginning. This is the 2024 early voting. And as you said, I think I can actually draw, which is amazing. Let me draw. As you said, the common misconception people get is they're like, all right, x-axis is something. Well, this is the total votes per machine. These are actually machines at polling locations. And then each of these dots, red and blue, is a precinct or a polling location in this case. These are all polling locations and actually voting machines. This is specific to Clark County, Nevada. They do use voting machines at their voting locations, and that data is sent off digitally. So, as you said, everyone thinks this is like beginning of the day versus end of the day, and that's not the case. So this is a snapshot. Yeah, this is a snapshot of after all the results, after all the dust is settled, right? All the results are in across the entire county of Clark County, Nevada for early voting. So this is actually multiple days. This is the end results of every one of those polling locations and the actual amount of votes on those machines. So it's funny because if you think of this in a time component, there is no time component to this because some of these machines were running and closed down days before the next. So this is just when all the results are done across multiple days. Yep. Yeah. And all we're showing is that for those machines that had more votes cast on them or reported more results or more votes having been cast, we see that there's a distinction of around 250 to 300. So after, or we don't want to use after before, we want to say machines that had more than 250 to 300 votes cast per the presidential race, they started to exhibit effects where the Republican candidate for the president begins to get a larger and larger amount of votes. And it becomes consistent across multiple machines, multiple locations. That is a red flag. That is a huge red flag, and that could be an indication of some type of digital vote manipulation. And here's a caveat people ask. They're like, well, could this be caused by the law of large numbers? And so the law of large numbers says something along the lines of, and I have another little graph I can show you that is an example of this. The law of large numbers says something along the lines of, you can expect more variation at smaller samples or smaller counts, but the more examples or the more, the larger the value, right, the less variation decreases. You almost become, pretty much a good way of saying it is, once you start sampling larger and larger groups and you have more and more numbers associated with those groups, variation goes down, you get closer to a average pretty consistently.
The more accurate the statistical inference.
Yes.
Right?
And
the larger
the
sample size, the more accurate the statistical inference.
Yep. And what people, we do show that in our results. Here's what we saw before, right? Early voting, that split after 250 to 300 votes per machine. This is actually the same thing. We've just binned it. So it's not a bunch of dots. It's just a bar graph per. So the x-axis is the same. It's the amount of votes per machine. The y-axis is the same. It's the percentage of votes the candidates begin to get on those machines. And then there's your Democrats and Republicans. So when you talk about the law of large numbers, we actually see that right here at 50 or less votes per machine. You see that immediate high variation from 0 to 50. That's the law of large numbers. You have low sample size or a low amount of something that's being counted, and there's going to be a lot of variation in the beginning. But then we actually see it begins to become more consistent up until about 200 or so votes per machine. And then we see that aggressive switch. And that isn't explained away by the law of large numbers. It doesn't make sense to see a consistent skew occur after you've already seen a pattern begin to form. And that's what we're highlighting is a law of large numbers does not explain this aggressive shift that is benefiting the Republican candidates across multiple machines because we believe you've established a pretty good consistency before that happens. So that is kind of the main issue. A lot of people say, they misunderstand that, and they're like, a little bit of statistics background. They're like, oh, this could be caused by the law of large numbers. We disagree.
I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to quickly mention that the kinds of things I talk about here aren't exactly the kinds of things that the powers that be want you to hear about. Like other progressive content creators, I operate at the leisure of those who control the social media platforms I use. So, if you appreciate what I do, all I would ask is that you go to my link tree and just follow me on whatever other platforms you might happen to use. I'm pretty much on all of them. All right, back to the video. My major question would be, is there any other reasonable explanation or unreasonable explanation that could explain what you're finding repeatedly with these X's, the dramatic shifts?
Yeah. So what that X is showing is that's just showing that's kind of the point at which they cross and the change occurs. In the beginning, we asked that same question. We said, what are some reasonable causes of this, right? What could cause this? And the first argument we were thinking is, well, maybe this is a unique effect of this location, right? Maybe these precincts that have more voters that are showing up are more popular for the Republicans, and this is just a side effect of seeing that. The problem is, and I can show you this, is we started digging a little more. We said, if this is a side effect of human voting behavior, can humans consistently across multiple locations vote almost uniformly like this? That starts to seem a little unreasonable. So we looked at 2020, and we said, if this is a normal thing, and this is a side effect of Clark County, Nevada, and the demographic of voters there, and this was the first state we actually analyzed, by the way, the first county. We said, well, let's look at 2020 and let's see if they look the same. Because if they look the same, every election or so, then it could be a side effect of the location and the people. What we found in 2020 was even more concerning, because instead of it being the same, we saw that although there was a similar aggressive shift after a certain point, it occurred at a higher vote per machine. And we're like, well, that's interesting. Why are we seeing the same effect, but at a higher threshold? And what could explain this away? That's where we actually looked at, maybe this is just unique to the presidential race, right? So we did actually look at the down ballot races. We looked at the Senate races for 24, for 2020, and we're seeing the same effect there as well. And so here's a caveat, is we're specifically worried about early voting in Clark County, Nevada. And you have all of these races on a ballot. So you go in early voting, you vote president and every down ballot race and some ballot initiatives. And the main thing is, this is the same person voting multiple races. This is the same person, same time, same day, same location. So we said, all right, if the presidential race and the Senate race look pretty consistent, maybe this is just a quirk again, let's look at some down ballot races. Let's look at races that aren't partisan in nature. So we did. So as I said, this is that same early voting just turned on its side. And instead of it being sideways and we're seeing that split, this is each candidate pulled out. And if you're familiar with our work as well, this is just another way of looking at the scatter plots, but it's showing it as a normal distribution. So that was our flag, as we said. This is the same thing where we're seeing a split after 50% or after, or after 250 or so votes per machine. Let's look at the down ballot races and let's see if they show the same pattern or same symptoms. And that's where we looked at nonpartisan races, as I said. So we're seeing the president and the Senate races look very similar. The same shifting occurring after or on machines with X amount of votes, and the Republican candidate beginning to win after that point. So we said, let's look at a nonpartisan state Supreme Court race. And there's two that we've showed here. These are different races, by the way. These are C and F races, I believe. And we're seeing that these don't exhibit any abnormalities as far as we're comparing to the early voting. We see that these look statistically normal, more like what we argue is normal voting behavior. a normal vote distribution. So why is it the same ballot where a voter voted for the president, the Senate, and this race, and yet you're getting different effects across the nonpartisan races? You're getting almost what we would say is normal effects on the partisan races or nonpartisan races. And this isn't the only nonpartisan race we looked at. We looked at their ballot initiatives. They have, I think, 8 in Clark County, Nevada for 2024. And we're seeing, statistically speaking, these look far more normal as well. And this is the first question, 1 and 2. There's also like a abortion question. I think it's ballot number 6 or 7. I'll have to double check. We did look at that initially, and it looks the same as these. So hopefully that answers your question in the sense you said, is there a reasonable explanation for what could cause this? It could be caused by unique voting behavior, but that voting behavior changes based on if it's a partisan race or a nonpartisan race. And that is a serious red flag for vote manipulation that is being targeted to benefit a political candidate or a political party. That is a problem. And as you saw there as well, we actually did do some digging, and we did map some of these places where a huge influx of Republican voters were reported. And it's in the middle of Las Vegas, which is a very liberal, I think they have over 100,000 Democrat advantage in those areas in the county. So it doesn't really match what the people in these areas are registered as. It doesn't match what people were seeing on the ground. They didn't see a huge influx of out-of-town voters. It doesn't match what actually occurred with the people. So we do flag this, and we are pretty confident at this point that we're worried this could be a compromise of the tabulation system, allowing you to mess with things digitally, creating the effects that we were seeing.
I'm far more pointed in my language, and I guess I have that I have that luxury. I'll just say, when I look at this data, I describe it as, well, the implications are incontrovertible. You know, that there simply is no other explanation for it. If you would like to support the work that the ETA is doing, head to this link right here. I spoke with Nathan for more than 2 hours, so hit that notification bell because there's a lot more to come. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.